Hey pals, I'm here today, very last minute, to do a Booker Prize long list prediction for 2022. They're announcing the long list tomorrow at 3 PM British Summer Time. Very excited. I don't think I've ever done a predictions for the Booker Prize. I've never read the long list or the short list. Historically, I used to think it was all a little bit like too highbrow / pretentious for me, but in the last few years I feel like actually out of all the prizes it's probably the one I'd be most likely to want to read all of the books from. So I'm not making any promises at all because I do not have it in me to read books I'm not excited to read. There's too many books out there, like fuck that. But I do have it in me if the list overall sounds really good to like read all the ones that I think sound really good. And if there's a couple that just sound okay, I could probably like force myself to read them. It's if they sound rubbish that I'm going to be like, no. Or just like completely not my thing, which, you know, could happen. There are a few books that if on the list, I'm just not even going to try and make myself read. For example, like Vauhin by Itessa Moshfegh, To Paradise by Hanya Nagahara. There is nothing that will make me want to read either of those books, even if they make the shortlist. So, the rules are, there's usually 13 books long listed. They have to have been published in the UK or Ireland between the 1st of October 2021 to the 30th of September 2022. There is like a word limit, they're not allowed to be too short, so usually books that are around 150 pages aren't long enough to make it, but like who knows how many words each book has, so I just try to avoid books that are quite short. And they have to be published in the UK or Ireland, but they can be by authors from the UK, Ireland, the US and the Commonwealth, which includes like a lot of countries. It's a bit of a vague way for them to do it, but it's how they do it. So for example, there's loads of books that have been published in Australia in the last year that I would love to see make the long list, but they haven't yet been picked up in the UK, so like they're not going to be there, so that's how it works. So 13 books. What I've done is I've chosen 13 books I want to read, okay, because yes, I could just go for like getting the most at 13 and I could pick the ones that I think are the most likely to make the long list, but I thought this would be a cool opportunity to talk to you about 13 books I was excited for, and also to promote some books that I hadn't really heard of before I was doing this research. And yeah, this is just sort of like a wish list, so hopefully if you enjoy my channel and you like the sort of books I like, this is basically me telling you about 13 books that I'm excited to read, and therefore you might also be excited to read. So whilst I am making this sort of a wish list prediction, I've also like considered things that usually make the long list. So for example, there are I think nearly half books written by male authors on this list. That isn't usually where my reading falls, but it's round where the Booker falls. They probably usually have more books written by men. Certainly like historically they would have had much more books written by men on the list. So yeah, I've done that. Also for example, quite a few Irish authors always make the list. There were so many Irish books I could have put on this list that I really want to read. Sound amazing, but I limited myself to I think only 3. There's usually a couple of really unheard of books, so books that haven't been published yet from really small publishers. I've got a couple of those, and there's usually 2 or 3 books that are like a bit weirder. So I think I've only got like 1 like that. There were like 3 I was considering, but obviously I could only fit 13 on, so I might mention the other 2 like at the end. There might be lots of cheating in this list, we shall see. Number 1, the book I will be the most shocked if it doesn't make it is Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. I read the corrections years ago, enjoyed it at the time, don't remember much about it. I've heard really good things about this. Jonathan Franzen is a bit of a like dick in person, but he's not done anything like awful enough to like be cancelled and like me not to read his books. He's just a bit rude sometimes. And I love a family drama. I particularly love a really sort of big family drama, and that's exactly what this is. He's just the sort of author that will make the list. I'll be surprised if he doesn't. The next one is a book I'm super excited for. This is like a 5-star prediction for me, and that is The Perfect Golden Circle by Benjamin Myers. I just listened to his previous novel, which was The Offing, and I loved it, gave it 5 stars. And I felt when I read that he was the type of author who could be longlisted for the Booker. He writes absolutely beautifully, and the themes he delves into are really interesting. And I think whilst he isn't necessarily doing something super new, I think he does what he does brilliantly, and I think that's what the Booker look out for, either like innovation or somebody who just like writes in the style they write to perfection. I love the sound of this one. This is set in the 80s and one like really hot summer, and we follow these 2 men from different paths of life who who are travelling the British countryside and I think like a beaten up camper, and they are making crop circles, and people start to like question who's doing it, and they start to get all this like notoriety and nobody knows who they are, and you sort of follow that summit, which sounds very interesting to me. Then the first of the Irish books to make the list, I have Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. This just sounds like Booker catnip, so yeah, I will be very happy to see this one on the list. I'm going to listen to this one on audio regardless in the next few weeks. This is set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and we follow a young woman who works as a school teacher in a small town near Belfast. She meets an older man who is a barrister, and he's made a name for himself defending IRA members. He's older than her and a Protestant, but she starts this relationship anyway. And yeah, like shit kicks off. I think there's like this violent event, and it says, as tender as it is unflinching, Trespasses is a heart-pounding, heart-rending drama of thwarted love and irreconcilable loyalties in a place where what you come from seems to count more than what you do or whom you cherish. How epic does that sound? Cannot wait for this one. The next book I have on my predictions is Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. This is a super buzzy debut novel. The protagonist in this book is a 17-year-old young woman, and she is caring for her younger brother because her mother is very unwell, and she's struggling to basically pay the rent and like keep food on the table. So she starts to nightcrawl, which is a slang term for sex work. And in doing so, she is involved in the police in this not very nice way and witnesses some things that she probably didn't want to witness. And it's supposed to be like a really twisty, dark thriller about that. I think this is based on like a true story. So yeah, it sounds really fascinating, a little bit dark though, so I'm a little bit nervous to read it, but also really want to read it. And the next book I've had nothing but amazing reviews for, so I've already put this one on hold at my library, and that is True Biz by Sara Nović. I remember when her book Girl at Wall came out a few years ago, and I remember hearing loads of people talk about it, and it was a book I put on my list to like eventually get to and still haven't. So I just feel like she's one of those authors who I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in her career she makes it onto the Booker, and based on the reception for this one, I think this one could be it. This sounds like a really fascinating novel. This is set at a school for deaf students, and we follow, I think, a few of the students and the teacher, and the students are all there for different reasons. So some of them, for example, have like never met another deaf person before, some of them grew up learning how to sign, some of them don't know how to sign, and you follow all of their stories, and from my understanding, in the book there is sign language like printed onto the page, and I heard Kendra talk about this on audio the other day actually. I'll link Kendra's review above, because I was wondering, oh, I wonder how that would work on audio, and she said that you can hear the narrator signing as they're talking, so you know when the bits would be spoken via sign language between the characters in the novel. So yeah, I think that sounds really interesting, and it just sounds like a really fun, uplifting but also important novel. Then I have another chunky book on the list, and that is Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer. This sounds fascinating, and this is one I reserved at the library months ago, and then I cancelled my hold because I had way too many books on the list, and I was just a little bit unsure if I'd enjoy this one because it sounded like there was an element that could be a little bit gimmicky. So this novel is split into like 3 narrative voices. One is our protagonist as a young girl, and you hear her coming of age story, which I love. One is her now, she is married and she has a young daughter, and she's found out that she has cancer, and it's her like living through that and coming to terms with it and having to go through treatment. And then the third narration is from the perspective of her cancer. And as I understand, as you get further into the novel, those 3 narrative voices like sort of start to converge with one another, which sounds really interesting. I was a little bit worried that like the idea of like the cancer telling the story would just be a bit gimmicky, but I've seen reviews for it and people seem to be thinking it's really amazing. And basically a book that follows a woman's life and is like really long is always going to tempt me to pick it up. So yeah, we're very happy to see this one on the list. And I think this one could make it because it's doing something innovative, right? It's doing something different, and that is what the book look for. Next one I have, which again, this is basically just a wish list, guys, like I said. So the next one is Post-Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson. I love the sound of this novel. And again, this one just sounds like it's doing something a little bit different. What I've heard is that the writing style is quite interesting, so I feel like this one has a chance. This is a debut novel about a young Black Latina lawyer finally confronting her dark past. It says that to an outside observer she comes across as like really successful and just like, you know, doing okay at life, but actually she's dealing with PTSD from like her past experiences. And it says for years she has self-medicated with a mix of dating, dieting, dark humour and smoking weed with her best friend forever, Jane. But after a family reunion prompts Vauhin to take a bold step, she finds herself alone in new and terrifying ways without even Jane to confide in, and she starts to unravel. Will she find a way to repair what matters to her most? This says the author performs an extraordinary feat, delivering a psychologically astute story about the aftermath of trauma that somehow manages to brim with warmth, laughter and hope. That sounds amazing to me, so yeah, would like to see this on the list. Then we have another Irish author. I'm pretty sure Donal Ryan has been longlisted before. If not, he's like definitely made prize longlist or shortlists like other than the Booker Prize before. Like, I know his name and I've heard amazing things about all of his books. This just sounds like the sort of book I would absolutely adore, so yeah, we'll pick this one up anyway. This follows a group of women from Tipperary. Apologies if I said that wrong. It says they are mad about each other, but you wouldn't always think it. You'd have to know them to know, in spite of what the neighbours might say about raised voices and dramatic scenes, that their house is a place of peace filled with love, of refuge from the sadness and cruelty of the world. It says it involves wives and widows, gun runners and gougers, sinners and saints. It's a story of terrible betrayals and fierce loyalties, of isolation and togetherness, of transgression, forgiveness, desire and love, about all the things family can be and all the things it sometimes isn't. Yeah, and I just love like intergenerational stories, and particularly if they focus on the woman of the family, which is precisely what this book does. Okay, so this is like my weird pick, okay, and this is where I said there could be quite a few books that make this like weird pick space. In fact, I think there'll probably be more than just the one, but this is the one I decided to go for, and that is The Immortal King Rao by Vauhin Vara. I think this is a debut novel as well. So this opens in an Indian village in the 1950s, and we follow a young boy who grows up to be the most accomplished tech CEO in the world and eventually the leader of a global corporate-led government. So we follow his story, he is King Rao. Then we follow his daughter, who in the future has had his memories like implanted in her mind. It says with climate change raging, Athena, who is his daughter, has come to believe that saving the planet and its shareholders will require a radical act of communion, and so she sets out to tell the truth to the world's shareholders in entrancing sensory detail about King's childhood on a South Indian coconut plantation, his migration to the US to study engineering in a world transformed by globalisation, his marriage to the ambitious artist with whom he changed the world, and ultimately his invention under exile of the most ambitious creation of his life, Athena herself. And this says it obliterates the boundaries between literary and speculative fiction, the historic and the dystopian, confronting how we arrived at the age of technological capitalism and where our actions might take us next. It just sounds super unique and like it's tackling themes in a really interesting and different way. So yeah, I'm excited to hear people review this one because I don't really know what to expect. The next one is An Olive Grove in Ends by McKenzie. This is about a young man who grows up in the volatile Bristol neighbourhood known as the Ends. It says in the tight-knit but sometimes lawless world in which he was raised, he falls in love with this young woman. But if she finds out about like the criminal underworld he's involved in and all the things he's done, he doesn't think she will want to be with him or want to love him anymore. And so it follows that conflict, him as he gets involved in this sort of criminal underworld and as he tries to hold on to her. And it says this is rippling with authenticity and power. This dazzling debut brings to life a vibrant and teeming world we have read too little about. It recalls the work of James Baldwin and marks the arrival of an exciting and formidable new voice. So yeah, sounds amazing, and yeah, just really feel like this is one that could make the list. Then I have Here Again Now by Okechukwu and Nzelu. This one sounds great, and I heard Grace talk about this one. I will try and find her review and link it above. I think she really enjoyed it. This is about three men who end up living together, I think, in one flat. And we have the protagonist who's called Okechukwu, and he invites his father to live with him because his father raised him and he's like happy to like repay the favour sort of thing. And then he also bumps into a friend who he has had for 20 years and they like make each other feel whole. But it says after a magical light when Okechukwu and Ikenna come within a hair's breadth of admitting their feelings for each other, a devastating event rips all three men apart. And from what I've heard, this is a really interesting exploration of the different types and forms masculinity can take, and it's really beautifully written. So yeah, this just feels like one that could make it as like a, you know, maybe not doing anything really different with form, but just writing really beautifully about grief and love and loneliness, and yeah, I just think this one sounds wonderful. And then we have an author who I don't know if she's ever been longlisted for the Booker Prize, but she has been for the Women's Prize, and that is Kamila Shamsie. And I didn't even know she had a new novel coming out, but she does, and it's called Best of Friends, and it literally sounds like if I had to like write a blurb of a book I'd want to read, this would be it. This is about two women who grow up as best friends. They grow up in Karachi, and it says they are unlike in every way and they never speak of their differences, of their backgrounds or their values. And then there's this fateful night that happens, and then 3 decades later they run into each other in London, where they both have these amazing careers, but then two troubling people from their past like resurface, and they have to confront what happened back then and maybe like band together to deal with it. I love books that are about like friends in any form, and particularly when those friends are women and they come from like exactly what they said, different backgrounds, and make different choices, and perhaps like resent the other friend for like having the options they wish they had or making the decisions they wish they'd made. And then if you add in like some secretive event that happened and like people who are maybe like have the ability to like destroy everything they've built, why wouldn't I want to read that? It sounds amazing. This last one is my most rogue pick because I hadn't heard of it. It's from a tiny publisher, I think based in Ireland. And yeah, I just thought I'd pick like a rogue one or two that like nobody's heard of. That's from a really small press, because those books tend to make it to the Booker long list. So one I've picked is Seek the Singing Fish by Roma Wells. I love the sound of this one. I definitely want to pick this one up regardless. This follows a young girl who grows up in the lagoon town of Kalau in Sri Lanka, I believe. And it says she has an unquenchable curiosity and a love of the natural world, but she gets tangled up in the trauma and turmoil of the Sri Lankan civil war. She's then uprooted through like tragedy and betrayal. And it says you follow her odyssey from east to west, struggling with what it means to belong as she desperately seeks a way home to the land of the singing fish. And this is another sort of Irish book because the author is a Sri Lankan and Irish writer with family heritage entwined with wild animals and sectarian conflict. Thematically, I love when books have a real focus on nature writing, but I also have an interest in novels that are set in conflict zones and seeing how that becomes like the new normal for people, and also when people like move to different parts of the world and that displacement. I think that's a really interesting topic. And yeah, couldn't find like any reviews for this one really, but just think it sounds really interesting. And yeah, like I said, I felt like it seemed sensible to pick like a completely random book that sounded good, because usually there are a few books on the Booker long list and everybody's like, I've never even heard of this, what the hell is this? So yeah, do you think my list is a good one? You'll have to let me know tomorrow evening if you think my list of books I haven't read and know nothing other than the blurbs about is better than the list they actually pick. We shall see. And like I said, I will have to decide whether I want to read and review the actual long list once I know what the list is. You know, if it's my list, I'll read it. So we'll see. I have no idea how much crossover I'll have. It could be, you know, 13 completely different books. It could be 13 books that were on my list of 30, or it could be 13 books that didn't even make it to my list. And then I'll be like, I don't know, I could be really interested. There could be books I love the sound of, but they also could not be. So we shall see. So yeah, let me know, do you read the Booker long list or the short list? Are you interested in following prizes? Are there any other prizes you would recommend that I follow? Because I'm always interested in just, you know, I think they're a good way to find out about like just recommendations, and I think they like uplift books. And there's certainly lots of issues with prizes, you know, just in terms of like the eligibility requirements, and also the fact that, you know, you just might not agree with the decisions the judges make. But I think they do work in like promoting authors and helping book sales. So yeah, that can't be a bad thing. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!